Hello and welcome to Kelly's Wordy Reactions. So, let's see. Let me do a little moderation real quick. Okay, I don't see what I normally see. Hello if you're just coming in. Just trying to do a modification. I don't see how to do it. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get this video started. So I might break in just a little bit, but for the most part, I'm probably going to go ahead and let this play because I want to really hear what she has to say about the subject matter here. And all right, I'm gonna go ahead and start this playing. I probably won't break in that much. And hey, Nesto, Shackle Shuffles Walk of Shame, how you doing? Thanks for coming in. It's late for me, but I wanted to give some perspective to some of the things that are going on right now. So I'm going to I'll let this play. I can't stream it, so I'm just going to let it play for you all. This lady, the name of her channel is Life Take Two, and her name is Jenny Gage. Now, when it starts, it's going to be a man, but that's just her. That's going to be just her playing a clip of somebody else's video. So she's playing, it's funny, all these clips of videos. So she's playing a clip of another guy's video, and he's looking at this man who is a pastor. I might be able to get his name before we go, but I just want y'all to hear her because she has a very interesting perspective as sometimes what she calls a Christian nationalist. She was definitely a Mormon. She transitioned, not transitioned, but she went from the Mormon faith from like growing up, completely growing up with generations of her family being in the Mormon faith. Then she went to um, the Christian faith on the Christian nationalist side, I guess I would say. And so she has a real interesting perspective. So let us let her talk about it. And like I said, I probably won't chime in that much. But yeah, thanks for stopping in. Okay, here we go.
This is Joe Webbin. He's a self-affirmed Christian nationalist. So he believes that far-right Christian extremists should be the only ones in power, and in fact, the only ones in the country. If you are not a Christian, you do not belong here, and you'll be deported, or you'll put in a concentration camp or something. Anyway, he's insane. I've covered him a few times, but listen to what he said recently. I moved to Texas. I needed to get a new cardiologist. And so my wife, she does a lot of this for me because before we had kids, she was an RN, and she fair enough, was a lot more than I do. And I let her read those books. She read some. Believe it or not, yeah. He's not smiling here. And so she's doing the research and looking at these things, and she shows me two doctors, both of this within the same practice, same company, hospital, and saying, do you like one over the other? And one was a young white dude, and one was a young black dude. And I said, I prefer the young white dude. And this is why. The reason why is not because I'm white, but because we currently live in a historical moment in the West, and particularly in these United States, where I know that both of these guys could be perfectly qualified. But I also know that if there's a chance that one of them was not qualified and was given a free pass, it'd be the black guy. I know that that young white guy, there's no way he got a free pass. Really? No way he got a free pass, you don't think? You haven't ever heard of any white guy having parents that paid for somebody to take the LSAT for them or whatever other medical examination? I am exactly 0% comfortable with this video today because I used to be exactly like this man. I was a Christian nationalist, white supremacist, hateful, awful human being. And what's crazy is, like, on the outside, I looked like just the girl next door with blonde hair and a smile and a house full of cute little kids running around baking sourdough bread in my little sundresses. I'm no longer Christian. I'm atheist. So I know it's always funny to people when an atheist quotes the Bible, but there's a little scriptural phrase where Yeshua talks about wolves in sheep's clothing and how dangerous they are. And I was that. I was a wolf in sheep's clothing, the Christian nationalist, white supremacist, hateful prepper with a closet full of weapons living next door to everybody. And if you had asked any of my neighbors, they probably would have said, that's a really nice family and she's a sweetheart. And the truth is, I had to be a sweetheart because that's how my community, my religious organization, who needed new members to come in so that they could profit off of them, that's how they got you. I was the bait. My sweet little smiling trad wife face, my beautiful little children, our pretty home, and our nice public facing personalities, that was the bait that got other people into the religion, and it still is today. But that nice exterior didn't change what was inside. So today I want to shine a light on what was inside, and specifically why my lifelong childhood indoctrination, grooming, brainwashing led me into the larger cult of Christian nationalism, white supremacy, eventually MAGA, and voting for Donald Trump in 2016. This is where I usually say, let's dive in. Let's tentatively see if I can dip a toe into this cesspool of hate that used to be me. Ready? On one of my videos. And yes, I took the earrings off because they were catching in my hair.
I'm just going to go past her intro, but I did talk about who she is, and I encourage you to go over to her channel and check out some of her content. She puts up a lot of this type of content.
And I just can't focus. I think these are ponytail, and this is the first video that you're watching. 7 years ago, I walked away from the Mormon church, and my abusive ex-husband of 24 years stepped away from my trad wife life, actually lost everything, every person in my family, my mom, my dad, my sisters, nieces, and nephews, and literally everybody. I'm a virtual orphan in the world, completely without a tribe, and I wouldn't have anyone to date if I hadn't met and fallen in love with a really beautiful man. We are raising 7 children together in ages from 14 to 28, I guess. Those are already raised. And because of everything I know from within this organization, as someone who lived like this for my entire first 44 years of life, I have spent every day of the past 6 years doing interviews, podcasts, documentaries, writing my own articles, and managing my own social media platforms with 400,000 followers over on TikTok, my following here on YouTube, so I can shine a light into the darkness. So now I'm not just some girl who decided to hop off the Trump train because of the Epstein files. This has been a long work in progress, and I have had huge impact on reversing some of the damage done by people like myself. And again, I was born and raised, I was indoctrinated, and it's really important for people to understand that there are new batches of children being indoctrinated into this hatred every day. I also think it's important to share with you that I haven't scripted this video. I just have a list of bullet points here to kind of remind me where I'm going, because I want my thoughts and experiences that I share with you from my past to be as organic and authentic as possible. I wanted this discussion with you to be very impromptu. So, why I voted for Trump in 2016, why he was my hero, why I jumped on board the MAGA train full steam ahead. Here we go. Donald Trump sold me on a mission: make America great again. And the Democrats simply didn't do that and haven't done that. If you'd like to hear a little bit more about this, then please check out my interview with Daniela of Knitting Cult Lady that we did this past week, because she dives into how that is the number one foundational reason why people get involved in cults. You have something, it's all about the mission. And you will overlook how bad the leadership is if they have a mission that you believe in. So I did a video yesterday where I talked about how my childhood growing up in the 70s and 80s had felt really good to me. I started raising kids in the 90s, and all of a sudden we had iPhones and this huge shift in the way society worked. And for somebody like me who's 50 years old, I saw society going in this direction that I thought was kind of alarming. And my Christian nationalist, alt-right, super conservative, white supremacist religion that I was part of was telling me that all of these things were signs of end times. And as my religious community was fighting back against these horrible shifts in society, Donald Trump came along, and all of a sudden we had this president who was on board with the same mission that my religious community was already engaged in, and that I, as an individual, was engaged in, and that was to make America great again, to turn back the clock and restore the way things always were. And it has been kind of interesting to me, after leaving MAGA, after leaving the Mormon Church, after leaving religious communities entirely, to go back and study political science from the very beginning of the creation of America and see how different parties had very specific missions and agendas, and how that the Democratic Party has really kind of lost sight of that. While certainly the Democratic Party has a platform and policies that they support, go ask the average American on the street if you could tell me about the Democratic Party in like one sentence. I think that most Americans would say abortion rights and gay marriage. When I've asked that question on my platforms, and again, I reach millions of people on my multiple platforms, those are the two answers that I get the most, followed by feminism, and that's usually followed by a comma, and the breakdown of traditional family. I also get socialism, which is the breakdown and corruption of our economic system, and forced environmentalism. Those are the top 5 answers that I get from people. And again, the Democratic Party has not attempted to brand itself the way that Donald Trump did. So his mission, Make America Great Again, was already my mission. And that got my vote in 2016. The next reason I voted for Donald Trump was that he was a strong, charismatic leader. And again, I was a church girly, and I was used to a bunch of men in charge. There were no women in charge. Women in my church could only be in charge of other women and children. Once a boy turned 12 years old, he could then be in a leadership position over women and have power over them. And like, I couldn't even lead anything over 12-year-old boys. So I was totally groomed to love this strong man like Trump. And that grooming also led me to spend 24 years with a horrible monster of a man who was very similar to Trump, with the grandiose narcissism stuff and some mental health problems and abuse and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, that was my upbringing. Church girlies tend to go for those, quote, real men, the alphas. In fact, I was really deeply afraid of kind, empathetic, benevolent men, like any of those beta type of guys, the simps, because to me, they might be gay, and they were not the men that God had designed them to be. Feminine and masculine roles had been deeply indoctrinated into my brain. So Trump it got me going. Not to dig too much into my personal life, but I do just want to kind of soften what a horrible person I was by saying that my partner of the past 6 years is everything that I had been afraid of as a church girly, and My life is so happy. He's incredible. The real man stuff that I was sold was bullshit. Next up, build a wall. I was a white supremacist in every way, shape, or form possible to be a white supremacist. I would encourage you to go to my Substack. I've listed the paywall in this article so that everybody can read it and see inside the mind of a very young girl. And I like to post pictures of myself when I was a 3-year-old girl, when my white supremacist indoctrination started, and I began to see people with brown skin as evil monsters. I believed that America was a sacred land that God had created and preserved just for my chosen rich white ancestors and myself and our descendants so Jesus could come, because I was part of an organization that had like the whole end of days thing right in the name, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Our whole obsession was prepping. If you've seen Lori Vallow Daybell and any of this prepping stuff coming out of Idaho, like that was our whole entire life. That's the mission of the organization that I came from. So we were waiting for Jesus to come back to the earth to rule and reign. And where was he going to rule and reign from? From Jackson County, Missouri, which was the original location of the Garden of Eden. So this is where the...
I'm not going to stop it much at all, but every time I hear her say that the whole Mormon church believes that the Garden of Eden was and is in Missouri, it just blows my mind how um, they could believe that. But I just had to break in and say that. Okay, here we go.
Christian nationalism part, it gets really, really, really big. Capital letter Christian nationalism with exclamation points in bold print. This land was a land preserved by God for just his chosen people so that Jesus Christ could come down and rule from Jackson County, Missouri, which my church called Adam Ondai Amen, and everybody was going to be burned prior to his coming, literally burned, actual burned, except for us chosen people who had been endowed in the temple of the Lord and cloaked with his righteousness. I genuinely wanted an all-white nation, and I wanted to send the Mexicans back to Mexico. Sometimes I like to think, what would old me have done in this instance? And I think that if Trump had changed the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America back then, when I was this white supremacist, I think that I would have literally like jumped for joy. I would have had like a Gulf of America bumper sticker on the back of my little Honda Odyssey minivan full of rich white children that I was raising in my country club behind a gate in my $1 million home, and my privileged fucking white people life. That, by the way, was built on land stolen from the Tohono O'odham and the Hohokam and the Navajos, and built by slave labor. So Donald Trump hating all those people that God hated and that my community had taught me to hate, that definitely got my vote. Okay, the next reason why I voted for Donald Trump is that I was a Christian nationalist, and he didn't believe in freedom of religion as much as he did in forcing Christianity on everybody else. And I know that he said that a lot in this election about how that, like, it's really important for us to have God. He has people in the White House praying. He has instituted this committee on religion, and he's doing everything that he can to get rid of actual religious freedom. And that is exactly what I wanted. I did not want any other religion to be able to be practiced except for mine. I wanted to root out all religion. There's a scripture, every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is the Christ. And I wore religious underwear throughout my life from the time I was 20 years old and got married until I left the Mormon church at age 44. So for 24 years, I wore this religious underwear. And this religious underwear had a little mark in the knee, just this little thing that they embroider into these garments, and it goes right over your knee. Here's a picture. And that knee mark literally indicates that every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is the Christ. And I was fine if that was done by force. If we forcefully had to make every knee bow and every tongue confess that Jesus was the way, totally fine. Next reason I voted for Trump was money, money, money. I believed in the prosperity gospel, where God blessed his chosen children with riches. This was taught by members of my church. This was reinforced by my rich ass religious community. I believed that if I kept the gospel, that I would be prospered, and that people who were poor, it's just because they were evil. I belonged to the richest church on the planet. My former church was recently written up in, I think it was the Wall Street Journal. I'll try to pull the article and put it in the description here. And the journalist said that they have so much money that they have left the stratosphere. They are no longer part of the global economy. They're so rich. They're almost $1 trillion organization. They bring in billions of dollars a month. So money was God's love language. So seeing the world through this filter, the prosperity gospel, Donald Trump just completely got me. I watched The Apprentice, like every single episode, and the whole thing, the helicopter flying over all the high rises in New York City, and the trench coat, the gold faucets, the chandeliers, the marble staircases, they got me. To me, they were a sign that he had God's protection, and his ability to make and manage money would then bless my life. It has been really interesting for me, having escaped my religious organization and hearing from so many people, especially on my social medias and different support groups and live events that I've participated in from people who've left evangelicism and other Christian faiths, how that a lot of other Christian religions actually teach like poverty and not being a greedy bastard. And I think that that in some ways was unique to my Mormon religion. And again, I acknowledge the irony of an atheist girl quoting the Bible, but Yeshua preached humility and giving away all of your riches for other people and poverty and all those things. So a prosperity Christian gospel, those words should never be strung together in the same sentence, in my opinion. The next reason why I voted for Donald Trump, his woman was silent. This is biblical, and it was a huge part of the indoctrination and the lifestyle that I lived. I was, after all, a Mormon trad wife, and a lot of my life was just sitting down and shutting up. I was used to a very specific patriarchy with only men in charge. It was called the true order of heaven. So even when I was inside of our religious buildings, the temples that you may see in your communities, my face was veiled. I was covered up when we were in the prayer circle because women are supposed to be silent. Okay, what's funny on this point is I secretly loved and voted for Barack Obama, but Michelle didn't know her place, and I had a great disdain for her. And as we saw her kind of interacting publicly after we elected him, I kind of regretted voting for him just because the first lady didn't know her place. And I hated Hillary Clinton so much that in college, and I was broke. My family did not have money at all when I went to school. So I was living off of like this shoestring budget, sometimes couldn't even afford to wash my laundry, but I managed to scrounge up money, put a check in the mail to Rush Limbaugh's merch store, and ordered this Hillary Clinton shirt. It was like Rodham Hood. She robs from the poor and gives to everybody. And I wore this shirt to class regularly at my racist, sexist, prepping church college in Rexburg, Idaho. The next reason why I voted for Trump, have you heard that saying, the enemy of my enemies is my friend? He hated everyone. He was always at war. Me too. Mexicans, China. So like the Chinese virus thing, that would have resonated with me back then. He was always at war with everybody, and I was raised in a community that we were always under attack. The persecution complex was probably my predominant reflex. So I absolutely loved that about him. It made me feel like somebody else was fighting the fights that I was powerless to fight. I'm halfway through my list and I feel like stopping. Next, he didn't seem to believe in baby killing, and that was the number one reason why I voted Republican. I didn't even know what the Democratic platform was about. I just knew that God had told us that if we killed babies, that the end times would come, Armageddon would wipe us out, and I would burn in Mormon hell, which is called the Celestial Kingdom. Next up, Israel was God's nation, and Trump talked a lot about supporting Israel.
And to me, Israel was number one because they were the chosen people. So when Jesus came back to Jackson County, Missouri, he was also going to have like a winter home over in Jerusalem where he would rule that part of the world. So to me, the Jews were God's other chosen people who had lost the chosenness, and then we had replaced them, but we were all going to merge back because the Bible, after all, said that Jesus was going to like beam down and land on the Temple Mount. And that's where that scripture comes from. Every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is the Christ. So to me, the Jews are like this brother from another era. And we all were going to be grafted into the same tree. That's what the scripture said. Okay, the next reason why I voted for Trump was America, 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 is what my bullet point says. I was deeply indoctrinated in American excellence, and as a Christian nationalist, God had written the Constitution, God had brought Christopher Columbus over from the old world to the new world. It actually says that in the Book of Mormon. There's scriptures that say that Christopher Columbus was led here by God so that all those end days things could happen and so the gospel could be restored. So America to me was God's chosen land. So anytime Donald Trump was like, America's the best, America's great, we're the best country in the world, that just gave me goosebumps. And all of this is probably why I now wear black on the 4th of July for 7 years running. You will not find an American flag anywhere. Why do I want a flag with like the blood of ancestors striped across it? Like now I'm so anti-American as a reflex to this. Like not that I'm anti the citizens and people and my neighbors, and I do appreciate having the freedoms that I have, but the whole cult of Americana with all of the American excellence, it just makes me want to barf. I cannot go to a fireworks show. I now see the excellence of humans. People are beautiful, and a border on a map is really meaningless. Like it's hard for me to actually say the word America on these videos because I was so abused by the cult of Americana that was predominant in my cult of origin. Okay, next up, I loved that he was mean. I lived in a religious community that went out of its way to fight against Prop 8, which is just gay people being able to marry each other and have a life partner. And we fought against that with a ton of money and like really, really in super mean ways. I was part of a religious community that shunned one of our own family members when he came out as gay because he was no longer Mormon, but most of all, he was gay. My entire family collectively shunned this young man and other members of our family, and I was a part of that. Of note, my giant family has shunned me for the past 7 years. I have not seen my own parents, almost anyone in my family, since I walked away from my church and started joining them. Here's a story that I told once on my TikTok that I'm deeply ashamed of. We had these neighbors across the street from us that were non-members. They weren't Mormons. It was an elderly couple, like maybe like in their, well, funny, like probably my age, like 50s or 60s. Yeah, they're probably my age. And they had a son who was in his early 20s who was born deaf, who lived with them. And whenever a new person moved into my cul-de-sac, very predatorily, I tried to share my gospel with them so that they could receive Jesus and be saved. And they kind of bit. They started coming to some church events with us. One Christmas, we had some missionaries from my church who spoke sign language. So I arranged this whole thing where one night we all knocked on their door. They had taught us some Christmas songs in sign language. And we stood in the street under the street light and we sign languaged, what was it? Silent night, holy night. I don't remember all of it. But we did sign language Christmas carols for this family. I will never forget this mom and dad and their son and just the tears streaming down their faces. And it was this beautiful moment of human connecting with human. And then not long after that, we invited them to come to the church and they refused and said that they didn't want to know any more about our church. And I dropped them like a hot potato and have never spoken to them ever since. Did never speak to them in the cul-de-sac because I knew that they had rejected the gospel and I didn't want them in my life anymore. These were not good people. So I really had no reason to talk to them further. But wait, that's not all. I went a step further. I'm trying to think how old I was. I was in my late 20s at this point, and again, lifelong indoctrination into this religion. There's a little scripture that says that if you've tried to share the gospel with somebody and they've outright rejected it, that you should take your shoes and you should sweep the dust of your shoes in their direction as a sign that you were sharing the light with them and they rejected it. So now God knows to destroy their household when Jesus comes again in his power and glory. So I actually took a pair of my shoes and I stood on my front porch and I just swept the dust in their direction. And if this little family had looked across the street at me, they would have seen cute little blonde Jenny and all these babies running around and like orange trees. And I opened my door and it smelled like sourdough bread, always just like wafting out of the door, and homemade jam and chicken in the oven. And it looked so cute. And they would have had no idea that hatred and rejection was actually in my heart. They had been instilled to me from this community. They would have just thought I had dusty Nikes, wolf in sheep's clothing. So I loved how mean Donald Trump was. He was dusting off the dust of his shoes on everybody. Still is. It's terrifying. He's not a nice person. The next reason I voted for Trump was guns. He loves them. So did I. We had so many guns. God gave us this beautiful free country so we could have all the guns that we wanted. And again, just had to go grab this for my dresser there. My actual scriptures were just one giant war. They were rivers running with blood. It says millions of bodies everywhere. This is one giant battle, and this is supposed to be an instruction book for us in these latter days as we come into the end of the world and Armageddon and everything. So I knew that we were going to have guns so that we could defend God's nation from the unrighteous. I read this book 6 times before I went to college. So like this.
And right now she's referring to the Book of Mormon. So I know she's not saying it, so just thought I'd throw that in.
Kind of messes with your head. I have a TikTok that I did recently where I was just reading a verse out of here, and that TikTok got banned for hate speech. The next reason I voted for Trump was not having to worry about being environmentally friendly. I don't even know why I'm crying. It's really hard to dip my brain back in my old life. Jesus was coming back. The world was supposed to burn anyway. And the global warming crap was just leftist propaganda and lies anyway. That's truly what I thought in my head. So to have a president stand up and say that was like, yeah, that's what I've thought all along. That's what my religious community taught me. I lived in Utah for a few years and there's no recycling. Like there's no recycle bin. They drive all the big Escalades and stuff. They are completely destroying their state because it doesn't matter. Jesus is coming back. Okay, next up, I loved that Trump was a family guy. Like all those kids, the trad wife. Trump was always talking about family and kids, and they were all working together. And that's what I saw in my religious community too. It was big families. It was like the dad had a dental practice and all of his sons went to dental school and they all kind of worked together. So to me, that was just another green flag that he was an amazing human being. This one's kind of funny. I voted for Trump because I believed that politicians were evil. Mitt Romney had lost, and like he was the Lord's appointed politician, and Trump was a businessman, not a politician. So I didn't trust the government. I didn't trust police officers. And by the way, Donald Trump actually had some good quotes about Mormons, and he quoted the Bible a lot. So to me, like he was as good as a Mormon. And I always kind of had this feeling that if somebody like gave him the Book of Mormon and the missionaries went and knocked on his door, that he would join the church, and then boy, he would really have some like true power of God. And that is my whole list. Now, there's a lot of other factors that went into me being super enthusiastic about Trump and MAGA. I feel like those cover most of them. And I do just want to ask once again, I understand why you would judge me, and I understand why you might be furious to hear people say this stuff out loud, but try to keep my comment section nice because it's actually really difficult for me to go back and tap into these former beliefs that were a huge part of my life. The reality is I had been brainwashed, groomed, and radicalized into a cult that turned me into an asshole. And I always wonder, how is this even legal? I belonged to a hate group that I had to pay a membership to get into. that taught me despicable things that caused me to hate and harm other people. And all looked so cute and wholesome on the outside. Like they kept that exterior so friendly and so sweet and so like nostalgic. Like it's just wild to me that as a 14, 15-year-old girl, I would go to these church dances where my leaders would make me get down on my knees so that they could make sure that my skirt touched the floor. That's what they did in the 80s and 90s when I was attending youth dances as a young girl growing up. And they would go out of their way to make sure that I was modest enough so none of the boys at the church dance would see my knees. Like, God forbid that that happened. And meanwhile, they're teaching me that Black people are evil and deserve to get AIDS. That the indigenous populations of the Americas were cursed and deserved the atrocities that the colonizing Europeans perpetrated upon them. Like, what the hell? Somebody make it make sense to me. It still doesn't make sense to me. But my life now makes sense because 7 years ago, I left the Mormon church. And if you haven't seen any of those videos, I was a full believing member. I bought into all of this hook, line, and sinker. I had raised all of my children in the church, sent a son off on a mission, was a temple worker, never missed a day of church. This was my life, it was my identity. And then one day I went to church, and the lesson in our women's group in that third hour of church was the evils of homosexuality. And I spent 10 minutes sitting in that classroom listening to the hatred and had a physical reaction to it. I was physically shaking. And I had this thought in my head that day. And this thought, people keep asking, how did you leave all this? It was one single 3-second thought that just swept through my brain. It was really unexpected. I don't know where this thought came from. I never thought this thought before. But the thought was this: I come to church to learn how to love people better. And instead, I'm being taught how to hate. And I thought, I can hate just fine on my own. What am I doing here? And I stood up and I walked out of the Mormon church at age 44. And I have spent the past 7 years deconstructing all of the horrible indoctrination, the Christian nationalism, the white supremacy, and my discriminatory views on other people so that I can have compassion for single moms and my LGBTQ friends and the First Nations neighbors that I'm surrounded by here in my state of Arizona. And it's absolutely been a process, and it wasn't a happy one. I didn't leave the Mormon church going, "Hey, I'm out of here." No, I left the Mormon church and tried to take my life. That's why I'm called Life Take Two, because I survived that. Because when my whole worldview crashed down, I was confused and disoriented, and again, lost all my family and lost everything. And it's been a really difficult journey. But here I am, happy and mostly free of hate in my heart. I didn't leave Christianity, by the way, until 2 years ago. I spent almost 5 years there, broke up with Jesus 2 years ago. And that's about the same time that I left MAGA, when I finally stepped entirely away from my religious community and the election was coming up. And why did I leave MAGA? Because for the first time, with this new empathy for other people, having deconstructed all the like cult of America propaganda that I had been indoctrinated with since birth, I started to look at the people in my MAGA movement and in the Republican Party and Donald Trump himself with new eyes. And I heard some of the things coming out of his mouth, and I could see for the first time ever, this is a hateful human, and I don't want anything to do with this. So it was just 2 years ago, as the election was kind of starting to get off the ground and Donald Trump was just announcing he was going to run again, that I stepped away and started looking into political parties. And as I read through, what do the Democrats stand for? What do the Republicans stand for? I realized I'm actually not a Republican at all. I was voting on hate. I was voting purely to protect the unborn and to keep gay people from living happy lives. And I will end this by saying that I'm probably more of an anarchist than anything. It would be nice if we had a complete societal shift, maybe everything collapsed and we went back to a more sustainable form of tribalism with some egalitarianism. I would love to see a matriarchy. I am pro-land back. Let's let the Navajos run America. I'm all for that. And I absolutely have not jumped into the Democratic cult. I know that there are problems in both. And the beautiful thing is that I now lead my life with critical thinking and the analysis of facts and evidence instead of just pure emotional religious indoctrination. Turns out my good old fashioned public school education freed me in the end. So I would love to hear from you in the comments as long as you are going to be kind and not tear me apart. And my hope in this is that it sheds some light on why people are acting the way that they are. And I think it's really important for people in America to realize that behind that shiny, happy veneer, in some of the people that you see around you, there is a lot of hate and discrimination motivating them so that we can act accordingly to protect our nation from these religious radicals. And I personally don't think that our happiness as individuals or as a nation lies in the past. I think it's time for us to build a better future. And if I was going to personally brand the Democratic Party, which I am trying to do as I reach out to senators, that is exactly what I would brand it. Build a better future. We need to recreate the American dream in a way that is safe for everyone, where we eliminate sexism and slavery, where we hedge our nation against the resource hoarders who are the parasites that have destroyed every human civilization on the history of the earth. I made a little graphic for America a couple weeks ago, and it's based on the poem at the base of the Statue of Liberty on Ellis Island. We are the United States. We are us. Bring me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, your immigrants from yonder storm-tossed shore. This is what we were all about. This is how my ancestors came to be in America. I have Irish and Scottish and Bohemian and German and Scandinavian and English immigrant ancestors, people from all over the world who came here to build a better future. And I sort of think that we need to all get off our asses and start doing just that. And stop listening to these self-aggrandizing narcissists who just have their own interests in mind. We don't need them. Stop asking what our leaders are going to do for us and just get out there and do it. That's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.
And thank you for stopping by. So that's not me. If you're just now coming in, her name is Jenny Gage, and her channel is Life Take Two here on YouTube. So if you want to listen to more of her content, more of her story about her past, Jenny was a Mormon. She grew up in the Mormon faith, generations of Mormon parents, grandparents, and all that. And she came out of that, I don't know, several years ago now. I think she said like 7 years ago at this point. And I enjoy um, listening to her take on things, as of now. So, so that's how you can find her. I thought I would bring some of her perspective um, over here and just spread it so people can have an idea um, what some people are thinking, because a lot of times people are not going to tell you what they're thinking. They're not going to tell you what they know that other people in their community is thinking. That is something that has not been abundant. And so when I find that, um, I do like to share it. Um, she has a pretty big following, but as much, I know everybody won't hear everything. So that is why I bring some, other perspectives to my platform. So if you don't get a chance to come across it on her platform or on some other social media platform, then, maybe you can pick up on it over here. So anyway, I'm not going to add or take away. I think she did that just perfectly. And that's all I have to say about that. So anyway, thank you for stopping by, and I will see y'all on the next one. Bye-bye.